In 1967, Mildred and Richard Loving became officially married in the eyes of the law. But why am I talking about this couple now, almost 50 years later? Weren't they just like any other couple? Just two people who decided to get married. What makes this marriage different? Well, it's because Mildred was black and Richard was white, which meant that in 1967, they weren't just like any other couple. But what also made them unique was the fact that while they weren't legally married until 1967, they had actually eloped almost 10 years earlier, in June 1958. You see, Mildred and Richard couldn't get married in their home state of Virginia, a state that they loved, that they were born in, raised in, and died in. And that's because Virginia, like many other states in the South, had racial integrity laws, which made interracial marriage illegal. For their love, the Lovings served a year in prison and were exiled from their home state so long as they remained married. This gross miscarriage of justice led the Lovings to a years-long legal battle, finally culminating in the landmark Supreme Court case, Loving v. Virginia. In that case, in a rare unanimous decision by the judges, the Supreme Court struck down the ban on interracial marriage in Virginia and subsequently in 16 other states. It was the first time that the Supreme Court would declare love wins. But decades later, other couples would experience the same degradation and humiliation, only now the issue would be gay marriage and not interracial marriage. But, based substantially on the legal precedent set by Loving v. Virginia, the Supreme Court reaffirmed, again earlier this year, in a landmark case known as Oberfeld v. Hodges, that all Americans, regardless of their race or sexual orientation, are entitled to the fundamental right of marriage. The idea that marriage is a fundamental right isn't particularly new or revolutionary. It is, in the words of Justice Kennedy, the keystone of our social order. So given the place marriage has in our society, it's understandable and even expected that it would excite a great amount of passion on both sides. And while that passion is noble in its genesis, it is too often led to discriminatory practices, which by and large look to religious scripture for their justification. But to use scripture in this way flies in the face of the separation of church and state, a benchmark of our Constitution. The separation of church and state is just as much a part of American life as marriage, and it has helped to define American society since its inception. And of course, neither I nor the Supreme Court wish to demean the importance of religion in anyone's life when we talk about the separation of church and state. No one should or could tell you what to think, and neither should they impose their morality on your personal, private life. And all we are advocating is that the same courtesy be extended to everyone else. Anyone who's watching this is free to disagree with the idea of same-sex marriage. You're protected by the First Amendment. But the First Amendment also extends protection to the law, protection from religious influence. And that's because public life should be ruled by law, because it is the closest thing to an unbiased arbiter that we will likely ever have. And I'd also like to take this moment to extend a brief word of caution and remind anyone listening that Scripture has far too often been used in the past to excuse the many atrocities, up to and including slavery and segregation. Of course, I'm not trying to directly equate the two, but it is nevertheless a pattern that I'm sure no one wants to see repeated. But the arguments to end this ban on same-sex marriage, they're not just rooted in religion. The blatant unconstitutionality of gay marriage bans was justification enough for the Supreme Court to make their decision this summer. Among the multiple arguments in Oberfeld v. Hodges, highlighting the violations perpetuated by the denial of marriage rights, there are two that receive the most attention, and rightly so. These are rooted in the 14th Amendment, which provides protection under the law through its dual clauses, known as the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. These clauses, much like they sound, seek to ensure that the rights of American citizens are not being violated, and they've been the basis for many watershed cases tackling discrimination by the state, ranging from Brown v. Board of Education to Loving v. Virginia. It was this precedent that Justice Kennedy called on in his powerful final opinion, where he emphatically refuted the notion that those in the LGBT community had been in any way receiving this equal protection, saying, "The Constitution promises liberty to all within its reach, a liberty that includes certain specific rights that allow persons within a lawful realm to define and express their identity." And doesn't the Constitution promise liberty to all? Isn't he right? Didn't we all say every day for 13 years when we put our hands over our hearts and pledged allegiance to our country's flag that liberty and justice for all? Even Thomas Jefferson, the man who authored the Declaration of Independence, is perhaps best known for saying much the same thing, that all men are created equal. But Thomas Jefferson also said something else. He said the rights of the minority should never be voted on by the majority. And that's why we have the law, to ensure that true morality, not popular opinion, governs our society. And I know that arguing that defending gay marriage is actually the moral stance to take in this situation is surprising to some people. It might even offend them. But even staunch conservatives, people who are members of a movement that have been at the forefront of the push for disenfranchisement, even they acknowledge that the world would continue to spin on once gay marriage is legalized. Marriage provides a mechanism for emotional stability, economic security, and the healthy rearing of the next generation. Prominent conservative activist Andrew Sullivan wrote that in 1989 in an essay defending gay marriage. He saw, just as many others have in the intervening decades, that expanding the fundamental rights of marriage does not undermine the ability does not undermine the stability of either that institution or our society at large. What's more, it strengthens it. It ensures that couples like the Oberfels won't have to spend years of their lives arguing to be recognized in a death certificate and to watch their partner die before that goal is realized. It ensures that the custody rights of non-biological same-sex parents will be protected, but ultimately it ensures that the family unit, that structure so long at the focal point of this argument of gay marriage, will be protected from the intrusion of the courts on the basis of nothing more than bigotry. When we talk about Sophie Hodges, there are so many arguments that we can make. We could talk about the separation of church and state. We could talk about the 14th Amendment. We could discuss myriad anecdotes of real, loving LGBT couples whose lives have forever been changed, and changed for the better, because of those 5 justices' decisions just a few months ago. We could even talk about Mildred Lowe, who before her death spoke about the freedom to marry and her belief that it should be extended to all. She said, simply, that's what loving and loving are all about. But for me, there is nothing that rivals Justice Kennedy's final statement to the court. It enshrines perfectly how the true centrality of marriage to American life, and explains why so many people have fought so hard for the same recognition under the law. He says, no union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. In forming a marital union, 2 people become something greater than they once were. It would misunderstand these people, these men and women, to say that they disrespect the idea of marriage. Their plea is that they do respect it so deeply that they seek to find its fulfillment for themselves. Their hope is not to be condemned to live in loneliness, excluded from one of civilization's oldest institutions. They ask for equal dignity under the law, and the Constitution grants them that right. I hope going forward, we can all try to remember Justice Kennedy's eloquent words, and not just because they're exceedingly beautiful.